So I dug through my parts that I took out of the car from when I took the seat belts out of the rear of the rear seats, and this is the bolt that goes into the side of the tunnel inside in the car. I think it's an M12 something or other, and then this one does not quite fit. So I'll have to drill this out a little bit. I did scavenge another size of that bolt. Just because this one has a little lip on it from where it protects the plastic or whatever of the seatbelt. But I do have one for now just to get the installation. But I did want to go over real quickly the Ultimate Battery Terminal. Negative and positive are a little bit different, just the diameter of where the lug is on the battery. But so this is just the negative one, but it has this protective cover that can be peeled off, and I'll peel it off in a second, but it also has connections in there for, I think it's 0 gauge, 4 gauge, and 8 gauge. It also has a connection here on the side that you can put a standard lug in that location. So if you wanted to use this on your battery in your factory location, of course, in an FD you couldn't because it's a little complicated because of the way that sits, but any other car you'd be able just to set this post on the side, connect your factory battery to that, and then you'd still have 3 connection points for accessories. You know, I think they were like $12 or $14. So by the time I got a nice, you know, whatever other brand out there, it was actually probably cheaper. And it looks like it's built really nice. Everything uses an Allen key to tighten. It's rebuildable in case it ever gets stripped. You do put your cable directly into this. It doesn't need a lug. However, I would recommend getting a wire ferrule and putting that on the end of your copper strands before you put it in there. I don't have one with me, but I will pick one up this week. But I'll use a ferrule on the end of this cable before I put it in there and then tighten that down. I'm gonna unwind a little bit of this and get some of this sheathing cut off, and then go ahead and get this crimped on. So I had a little bit of an issue with these lugs. I don't know if it's because this is a fine strand and these were more meant for more, you know, a coarser stranded copper, but it seemed like this just wasn't cinching down tight enough, and I was actually getting quite a bit of the material squishing out the side there. So I've got these other lugs. I will try those and see if we have a little bit better success. So it's not pretty, but I don't think that's going to come off there. I don't know if it's because I'm at the limit of what this can do, and maybe both of these are a little thicker than what's intended. I'll put some heat shrink over this so you won't really even see it anyway once it's in the car. I went ahead and drilled that out so that the M12 bolt will fit in there just nicely. I use a smaller piece of cable to kind of route the wire how I thought it should go in the car, and just cut it to the length that I was going to need. And that length is measured from the center of the bolt hole to the terminal on the battery, with a little extra for, you know, taking off the sheathing and stuff for the to connect into the terminal. So I'll mark this right here. So really that's all I need for the negative side. I will go ahead and put on the heat shrink on that end, but I'm not going to cut this until I get the wire ferrule, and then I'll be able to put all that together. For now, that's the negative side of the battery finished, except for the heat shrink. The positive cable is going to have to route up to the terminals that are on here. So I need to kind of decide where this needs to mount inside the bins. But again, I'll just probably end up needing a very short piece like this, and this will probably mount to the very back of the bins in a place where it'll be relatively easy to disconnect these when I need to take the bins out of the car. I think I'm also going to have some issues with the terminals on this guy, because I think these are the ones that fit. Well, they fit if you go in from the side. No, yeah, they'll just barely fit. So I may need to go and look and see if I've got a different one that's a little bit smaller. So that's the next thing, is figuring out where I'm gonna mount this in the bin. I popped the bins back in the car for just a second so that I could locate my circuit breaker, and there was plenty of room. I could have put it over here and pretty much anywhere along the upper part of the bin. There wasn't going to be any issues, but ideally I'd like to be less than 6 inches from the positive terminal on the battery. So I'm just going to put it right here. Plus that'll be easy access, and it looks like it's sitting low, but I think it'll actually be just above the top of the battery when it's in the car. So this will be easy to push and activate. If it ever gets a trip, it's pretty easy to push. Really, I just need to fabricate a short line to go from the positive terminal of the battery to the battery side of the circuit breaker, and then this will be the connection that goes out to the rest of the car. That is where that will end up, and it'll be out of the way when the bin's closed. So the last thing I really need to do is figure out where that positive battery cable is going to go. So this is a couple days later from the last clip, and what I needed to do was pick up some different lugs. And I think what I concluded is, I purchased like this one, for instance. It said it was for a 1/0 cable, but the overall diameter of that lug is significantly larger. I know this one is open-ended, but so I think what I had is an issue with these being, the ones that are on there just being too large, and that's why it wouldn't fit with these crimpers. But I think I've gone through and I've got and verified that these all have a stamp of 1/0 on them, and they look like they're going to fit just fine in the crimper. If not, I've got this Anvil Crimper as a backup, and really this is probably what I would just recommend to use anyway, because it's very simple and pretty much you can't go wrong with that. So I picked up a pack of 10 copper lugs, and I'll use this one in the engine bay. This one I'll use for the ground connection to the body underneath the bin. These two I'll use for connecting to the circuit breaker, but they won't quite fit as is. So I'm gonna have to grind just a little bit off one side or the other, and so that they'll slip down on the posts that are on that circuit breaker. But these have a 1/4 inch holes, and these are 3/8 inch holes. I will need to enlarge this hole just a little bit like I did on this one, just so that this will fit on it, but that's pretty self-explanatory. And then I picked up a pack of wire ferrules, and I'll use these to collect all the wires before they go into the terminal. I'll show you more about that and why I use them, but basically this will help keep the wires from fraying out and actually give it a little bit more of a secure connection. So I'll show you more about that when we install it. For now, I'm going to go ahead and remake this ground cable. If there's any chance I can just pull this off. I do think this is going to be a little bit longer than what I need anyway, but if not, I've got plenty to remake that. Now that we got all the right size fittings, this should go much easier. So these lugs are definitely the right size, but I don't have, I feel like I could just sit here and wiggle that off if I tried hard enough. So I'm really not impressed by that crimper, but all that means is I'll just get to use this Anvil crimper, and basically you really just drop it in here and hammer it down. Hit it sufficient number of times that really deforms the lug, but I'm not going to do this here. I have to take it down and hit it on the ground, but I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished. So I think that's nice and secure now. It doesn't feel like there's any play to it, so I'll go ahead and get the heat shrink put over and get that heated up, and then we'll prepare the other end for the wire ferrule. So for the other end of the ground cable, I need to prep the cable to go into the terminal. Now, this has a set screw type connection. You could just strip the sheathing and stick the plain wire in there, tighten this down, and that in theory should work. Now, if you over tighten it, you could damage the cable, the copper wires. I've had, these are a lot of time on amplifiers. This was in maybe some of the new ones as well. This is the type of connection that you normally had, and inevitably over time vibration and things could cause that to come loose. So to help with that issue, you want to put a wire ferrule over the wires before you set it in the set screw. So you'll strip the sheathing off the same basically dimension as the wire ferrule. Then we can go ahead and stick the wire ferrule in here and tighten down the set screw, and that's going to deform this, and then essentially we could take the wire in and out, and then it'll always have that same shape, and then this will protect the individual copper wires from getting damaged. The only tricky thing to this is that this is going to sit on top of the battery, this is going to want to bend around and make the connections. We're not going to get the orientation 100% correct, but we could probably get close enough. I'd rather do this now than once, you know, the battery and all this is in the car, where access will be much more difficult. I basically set this up like it would be on the battery terminal, and then, you know, somewhat, you know, created the routing that cable is going to have to kind of set where I need to get this ferrule tightened in. And I didn't go super tight on it, but tight enough that, you know, I'm pulling pretty good. That's not going to come out. So I'll back this out to show you essentially what happens. You know, so it, you know, keeps all the cables nice and tight, the loose wires, and then it also, you know, creates a little divot. So I'll put a little piece of heat shrink on here just because I don't like having that exposed copper there. But that finishes the ground cable. So now the process, I need to make another short cable like this to go from the positive battery terminal to the circuit breaker. And then I need to go ahead and prep the end of the wire that we're going to run through the car. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll check back in when that's done. So here's all the cables that I needed to make to get the battery connected into the car. So this is the ground side already, and I went ahead and just kept it on the terminal because that's complete. I went ahead and used black cable just because I have plenty of extra to make this short piece that I'm going to need to go from the terminal over to the circuit breaker, and I'll leave that long for now, and I'll cut it to the final length once everything's in the car. I just wanted to make sure I had plenty of the red cable to make the run that I need to make to get up to the engine bay. This is left long. I don't have the ferrule on it, and I'll do all that once everything else is in the car, because I can make this adjustment that I need to make to the, you know, make this the perfect length. I went ahead and made the connector that plugs into the circuit breaker. And just because I know from my research online that there was some questions about, you know, fitting over these lugs. So basically the side that I'm going to have resting or nearest the body of the circuit breaker, I shaved, I mean, just, it wasn't even a 1/16 off of this side. And once I did that, you know, basically slides over no problem. And so, you know, I did that to both of them. And so that'll be the orientation of, this will be the wire that goes down to the engine bay, and then this is the one that'll come up and connect to the battery. But just in case anybody's wondering, I did use a 1/0 lug that had a 1/4 inch hole in it. This is a 1/4 inch bolt for the circuit breaker. So that'll go on there, and then of course this one will actually be over there, but then I'll run out to the battery. Once this is back in the car, I'll go over the routing of the positive cable. And just before I stray away from it, this Anvil Crimper, or hammer crimper, whatever you want to call it, it worked great. I would highly recommend this because I think this one, I don't know, maybe on the smaller gauge wires, I'll test it out and see if this one works okay. This crimper, it had really good reviews online, but my experience so far is that it didn't quite crimp as tight as I would like. But you know, this one, you can give it all the beans and hammer it down as tight as you want, and it does a very wide range of cables. So if you don't have one of these and you're building cables, I would recommend this crimper over that kind. And I know there's hydraulic ones out there, but for as cheap as this is and as handy and useful as it is, this is the one I'll probably use the most often.